Hello, my name's Kathy Greven. I'm from Greven & Co. We are financial strategists for life for our clients through accounting and financial planning strategies. Today I am joined by Angus Sippe from Human Financial. He is the Chief Investment Officer and heads up the development of investment strategies and design and has over 20 years in investment management experience. Welcome, Angus.
Hi, Kathy. Thanks for having me.
So how about you tell us a little bit about Human Financial?
Sure. Human Financial is an investment business which is dedicated to sort of working with financial advisors for their retail clients. So we aim to deliver sort of institutional grade strategies with a few more bells and whistles down to that retail market by empowering those financial advisors with some of these investment tools that traditionally have only been available to the bigger end of town.
Okay. And what does a typical day for you look like?
Yeah, well, probably much like yourself, Kathy, a typical day is very untypical, but generally, as we're working with financial advisors, we often want to provide white glove service. So empowering them is a lot of bespoke work with financial advisors to find the right mix of strategies for them. But my overarching role and the core of it is to look at financial markets globally on a daily basis to make sure that sort of across our different model strategies, we have the right implementation and allocations across that to sort of navigate this complex world. And then really it's about boiling down those complex issues into digestible snippets for advisors as well as their clients. So ensuring they can kind of understand and see through the complexity of why we're doing and how we're doing what we do.
True. And in terms of the markets at the moment, they seem to be sort of somewhat stable in comparison to what's going on with the world. How can we explain that?
Yeah, I think I would agree with you there. And there's that old adage, the markets can stay irrational for longer than you can stay solvent. And so while markets are always or traditionally thought of as being forward-looking and pricing in the future, there are periods where markets can sort of dislocate from fundamentals and reality. And depending on which side of the aisle you sit on now, whether you're bullish or bearish, there's two very different answers to this solution. But at the moment, it certainly looks like markets are pricing in a lot more optimism than the fundamentals we see today suggest. So we think it's sort of in this period of reflection, so to speak, where it's likely that markets are going to face more challenging times ahead.
I think you're right in terms of when I'm talking to clients at the moment in regards to their portfolios, and they always look to us for guidance and advice and support. How do we explain to them that, the wars that are going on, the different personalities, I'll say, that are in charge, and how that impacts on financials and on markets, and how does that make us all feel safe, as individuals to live our lives when nothing's really going up and down in terms, well, the markets are sort of going a little bit up and down, but not too bad. But, we're anticipating an interest rate drop before Christmas, so it just seems counterintuitive in my mind. And that sort of leads me to, how can children or young adults these days afford to buy a home, in terms of the pricing of all the houses in Australia. How does that make people feel safe moving forward?
Yeah, I think that's right, Kathy. And house formation or buying a house has kind of always been viewed as the Australian dream. So while it's important everywhere around the world, it's sort of even more poignant or sort of important here in Australia. And if you think about these things, is when you're going through a period of change, and we think we are in a period of economic regime change, those periods of change result in a different future path. And so if you have an unknown future path, which always be unknown, but a less probabilistic path going forward when things are changing, then you have to dial back your conviction on what you know. And a simple point of that is, Donald Trump looks to be tearing up 100 years of free trade with tariffs. And so
Yes.
therefore you can't have conviction that the recent past is going to be, the future is going to look like the recent past. So if we look at home ownership here in Australia, really since World War II, you've seen home ownership rates falling across all age groups, and that's being accelerated. But you're also starting to see people adapt to that. So over the last 3 years in major metropolitan centres here in Australia, those cheaper homes are growing faster or in sort of price appreciation. So people still have that home ownership dream, but they are finding it harder and harder to get on that home ownership ladder. And this is a result of years and years of sort of different political strategies in order to sort of make the middle class richer, and that's where democracy really works.
True. And that middle class Australia is basically coming to retirement soon.
Yep.
And so-called the bank of mum and dad. So how's that going to impact, people who are looking to retire or are in retirement, but also want to help support their children with the bank of mum and dad, and sort of trying to manage it all, put it all together? How does that impact? How do you see that impacting on investments? Are people taking more risks so that they can try and get more bang for their buck?
I think so. In general, people are, and maybe not knowingly in some of these products. But if you look back traditionally, you had in superannuation or the accumulation phase, people were allocated towards growth strategies.
Yes.
And then historically, the solution in retirement was to move to income generating strategies to replace that salary. Now, there's the old adage that Warren Buffett says that, no one ever grew rich from working for someone else. And I think that holds true when you look at these sort of retirement strategies. So as people want to leave some type of financial nest egg to their children, you can't just have retirement products focusing in on income. There needs to be an element of growth and income.
True.
So, you have, because when you focus in on income, you actually subtract from the growth side of things. It's sort of, it's a binary outcome. And if you look back traditionally on those income generating strategies, they've underperformed the growth strategy. So people will focus, I think, more collectively on a mix of growth and income, which will allow them to have money throughout their retirement to finance their lifestyle, but also something at the end to pass on.
True. And, the Morrison government brought in, a few years just before COVID, the retirement legislation asking or challenging product providers to try and minimise, I should say, not eliminate because you can't, but minimise longevity and market risk. What's your thoughts on those?
Well, I mean, it's interesting in that that's solving for sort of the individual. Because if as a collective family unit or passing on wealth, then the longevity gets extended. And so I think it's not about one size fits all. And there's also the behavioural element is you've taught people to save over their working lifetime. And then you'll know better than me, convincing people to spend in their retirement is quite a big challenge. Yeah, it's very tough, right? Everything they've learned to that date suddenly gets unwound and reversed.
Exactly. And so, I talk to clients often, especially as they're getting older in their 80s, they don't want to spend too much. But I say, well, start giving some of your inheritance money while you're alive and cherish the outcome that gives. You can see what your money does rather than, waiting until you pass away. So, but you're right. People's mentalities for decades of save, they just can't get into the habit. Yet, reversing that, you've got the younger generation that can spend like there's no tomorrow, So I want that, I'll have that now, So you've got the completely different opposites not personalities, but mindsets as to what's important to people. So maybe the baby boomers are starting to that mindset, from World War II, and not having to, having to save all the time. You've got, the children haven't had that scarce mentality in their life, and therefore they're not having to deal with it. But I think they're going to have to deal with it with inflation the way it is and the cost of living starting to rise. So, and unable to, afford a house, it's like something's got to give. Don't you think?
I think you're absolutely right. And everyone's a byproduct of their own personal experience. And so the younger generations, especially here in Australia, that haven't seen a recession for over 30 years, are really unaware of that downside. And until recently, they were unaware of sort of high interest rates. And if you scale back, even the recent interest rate levels aren't particularly high, certainly to some people who lived through sort of the 70s and 80s type periods. And so not understanding that there can be some meaningful downside and there can be other economic regimes besides growth is something that is likely to be in people's future. And some of these people have never experienced that, which will make them question kind of what they've learned that the older generation kind of had lived through and knew.
Very true, very true. And I find that when I speak to clients, a lot of them, the younger, so we're talking 45 and under, find it challenging to actually manage their funds, but also to save. And how do you save? Or what strategies can we use for cash flow management, which is sort of unreal for me as a financial planner. It's sort of what I do, and I can help them with that. But it's like, I would have thought their parents would have shed some sort of light on it. But clearly, not only from the clients I'm hearing it, but also from the media and the articles that I'm reading, is that, people just don't know how to save anymore. Is there any tips that you can share on that?
Look, I think you're right. And it's a very common theme I hear from financial advisors around the country is that generally people have not had to make financial sacrifices, and the priorities they would put on their financial sacrifices are very different to what their parents' generation would do. And this goes back to sort of the financial knowledge is people can't even understand where to make those sacrifices. And so they look at the short term rather than the long term. And the data suggests that people are making sort of health sacrifices and not getting checkups or putting their health secondary to other financial objectives to try and save money in this cost of living crisis, which the government's kind of already identified. And while the financial markets look to inflation to get back to a more manageable level of about 2%, the problem with that is we're already at an extreme level of pricing. So any additional inflation on top of what's already kind of somewhat ridiculous, and we all go through this, is, we tap on something and go, did they just say what that price was? It's getting pretty exponential, and everyone doesn't necessarily think they have an exuberant lifestyle.
No.
But people are going to have to make these sacrifices, and as simple as a budgeting process.
Correct.
To look at where they can make these sacrifices and sort of find other ways to save money. And I think there are plenty of tools out there that people can do, and it's understanding that making these short-term sacrifices will not only help balancing the near-term budget, but it will also help deliver a more healthy retirement for them.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your pearls of wisdom, and and hopefully you have a good week, and we'll catch up. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy.